everybody. Welcome once again to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you as I always do from my little nutshell of infinite space, my television studio apartment right here in the Wood of the Holly. On the other side of this digital divide, I have a incredible individual who's coming to me from Miami. She is a winner of countless humanitarian awards, and she has found herself over the last 21 or 22 years at the wrong place at the right time, or the right place at the wrong time. I'm not sure how to describe that, but she is the honorary doctorate of, she earned the honorary doctorate of letters in the humanities from Loyola Chicago University. She's also won the Order of Australia from the Australian government and Queen Elizabeth, the Medal of Excellence from our own 82nd Airborne. And this person is just back from the killing fields of Ukraine. And I want to welcome her to A Rebel Without Applause, and more specifically, my latest playlist called Ukraine Voices. Welcome, Dr. Alison Thompson. How are you?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me on the show.
Well, frankly, it's my privilege and anybody's privilege who gets a chance to watch this. I mean, I'm sitting here in the absolute comfort of my life in the Hollywood Hills, the Hollywood sign, right above my head. I'm just in this cocoon of safety, and you have been, well, where the action is in this latest historical moment, and you seem to find them. So, firstly, congratulations on your incredible work. And since you're just back from Ukraine after, I guess, since this catastrophe began, simply, how are you?
I'm good. Disturbed about Ukraine, and it's weird coming in and out of a war zone and then to Miami. I'm still looking above for the rockets and the missiles to go over the head, and when you see the chemtrails overhead, I kind of have a second look. There's a major civilian war going on. These are fishermen, farmers, and accountants, and lawyers, and filmmakers, and they're given a uniform and a gun, and they're being sent to the front lines, and they're dropping like 100, 200, 300 a day. So it's really tragic. But the spirit of the people is really high right now. So I'm staying on that high with them, and I'm not going to give up. I'm going to continue the work.
Now, a lot of people in America, we hear it in our politics all the time about fighting for freedom, but it's generally in a kind of metaphorical way. But you're in a place where there's a real fight for real freedom over real territory and a real culture that's at risk here. I can only imagine what that's like,
Especially for when you say the fisherman and the farmer, because it's actually his river and it's actually their land. And the spirit of the whole world coming together and like pushing love and aid and all the help, you really feel it over there. But then on the other side, you have the 18, 20-year-old Russian kids that are fighting, but it's not their land. So it's a different heart. They're not as fighting as hard, and they don't have the backing of all the mums and all the people sending food and all the new shoes and socks and all the things that on that side. So I kind of feel for that side as well, because especially to the younger kids, when our troops capture the Russians, they keep the captains and the higher up ranks, but then they take the guns and everything from the Russian kids, and then they send them back, and they send them back to walk back to Russia. And then hours later, so many of them are coming back, and they said, we've seen the atrocities, it's so bad, and they want to switch sides. And they've actually joined the Ukraine military. I mean, they keep an eye on them in case they're spies and that, but it's really amazing to see that, and it's happening in hundreds and hundreds and thousands of the Russians.
Well, as you describe that, I think back to, now I'm not that old, but in 1917, when the Tsar's Russian army was facing the Germans on the Eastern Front, and they famously, as Lenin said, voted with their feet and left the war. They simply walked away and returned to their home. And guess what happened? There was a revolution called the Russian Revolution. And I thought that was a distinct possibility, in Ukraine now, that, as you sort of described, that these Russian soldiers that are essentially cannon fodder for one man's outsized imperialist czarist ambitions might do the same thing. Is that something you've observed? Is that a possibility?
I haven't observed it, but our troops on the very, very front lines have observed it. And they have a lot of the Russians are just heading back to Russia. So that's a lot of them, but then there's still a lot that have come in from all these other countries to fight, from ISIS and Al-Qaeda and certain Syrians, and they're just coming in for the fight, but they're coming in from 52 countries, for both sides. So then it gets more complicated because they're being paid and they're there for the money.
Mm-hmm.
So, but for the younger Russian troops who are, they are connected to the world. They know the internet, as opposed to the old ones that are only listening to the disinformation or the propaganda. They know what's going on, and so those ones are walking.
And are you seeing a lot of Americans there, either volunteer service people or aid people like yourself?
There are so many veterans on the ground. I mean, I'm talking about 20,000 plus. There's a lot of veterans that have joined the fight, or they are teaching combat tactical. We teach combat medics to save lives. If they blow their arm off, they put a tourniquet on, and that they'll lose their arm or their leg, but they'll still be alive. So all the basics of it's called TCCC, and it's how to grab them from the red zone. So a lot of the troops are training tactical, or some medics as well. But then after a while, they want to get into the fight. So I find that over the last 2 months, they're leaving to go to the front lines, and they're right up the front lines. And they're actually leading groups of Ukrainian civilian soldiers, which they really need the help and they need the guidance because, so there's so many UK soldiers, USA soldiers, Canadian soldiers, but also from 52 countries. It's just amazing.
And is there a unity of command and leadership over them, or are they all just sort of like?
Yeah, they have to sign a contract, and they get paid. So they're kind of more like called mercenaries. If you don't sign the contract, you're just a volunteer. So there's a volunteer, humanitarians, and then there's the humanitarian under contract. They sign a contract, but the organization isn't too put together over in Ukraine, and they're some of them are running around all over the place. But it feels like after a lot of them are from Afghanistan that were originally in Afghanistan war, and they were so shocked by the sudden, they had to leave suddenly. So they were so anxious, and so they've come back because they haven't finished their story yet. So there's so many out there, and they're giving us protection, and then they're on the front lines. I'm surprised a lot more of them haven't been killed yet. I haven't heard that on the news.
I'm not hearing about American fatalities in Ukraine. Doesn't mean they're not happening, but I don't know.
And they send me every few minutes texts and videos from the very front. It's interesting because in a war, the communications gets taken out. But Elon Musk put the Starlink above. So on the very front lines, you can get WhatsApp, Facebook, text, and everything. We try to stick with Signal so the Russians can't track us because it's encrypted. But when we're back away from the front lines in Odessa and that, you can use everything. And so it's so interesting. And there's a cyber war. There's a ground war, but the cyber war is interesting. And Ukraine is winning the cyber war because they're really good at hacking or whatever they do. So that's an interesting part of the war as well.
Wow, it's amazing. Now, the nature of, I don't like to talk about war like people talk about the sports page, but the basic sort of nature of it, it feels to me, whereas like in World War II, you had armies clashing on, wide frontiers. This strikes me as an artillery battle over long distances where maybe the soldiers aren't seeing their enemies, but maybe that's a misconception, but that's the conception I get.
Yeah, no, it's both. There's artillery and everything, but there are clashes, brutal clashes on the front lines, especially up in Donbass region, but also down in Kherson. So it's a mixture of both, but you don't see a lot of that because a lot of the Ukraine soldiers too don't want video or photo of their face or anything because the Russians are doing a lot of strange things. Like during the first few months, one of our US Marines veterans who's protecting us, he got an email that looked so real that his sister had died, and it was her funeral. It was what's it called when the epitaph, all of the funeral details, and he started crying and he was freaking out. But it was fake. The Russians are doing that to all the volunteers and the soldiers and telling them their parents have died or their brother or sister died and all sort of stupid things like that. So
that's what they did to Hillary Clinton's campaign during the 2016 campaign. So they've had some practice at sending what they call phishing, to get.
Yeah, and I really believe all the disinformation we've gone through, since 2020 and everything that's gone through with the politics, all that disinformation came straight from Putin. All those tricks about taking the post office things away and disinformation and doing this and doing that, it's come straight from him and it's infiltrated America.
Now, just describe a little bit. I'm going to do your story because ultimately you're interesting personally, but this war started February 26th, took some people by relative surprise. How long did it take you to get there, and when did you feel like you could be useful and needed? And describe just how you got there and how you...
I was there that first week. I just knew I had the skills and I could do something. And I often say that if you have love for humanity and compassion, that the whole country is one, the whole world is one country. So I just knew I had to get there. I knew that we had the skills to be able to teach them, the civilians. Well, first of all, we started off with extracting orphans, special needs orphans that were already adopted to American parents. Mm-hmm. And usually the extraction is 24 hours and 48 hours. And we went with a group called Exodus, who are amazing. And they've been working there since 2014. They're Americans. Uh-huh. But it was so much complicated on the ground. It was just hard to maneuver. A lot of the orphans were behind Russian territory. A lot of the orphanages, even though we had all the paperwork, wouldn't release them because then they'd be out of a job. And then there was some other tricky stuff going on with the government and things. So we pivoted to rescuing hundreds of women and children and just getting them from frontline towns and getting them to borders. And then a lot of other orphans we have in orphanages on the border of Moldova. And then we saw this great need because people don't even know CPR or basic things over there. So we started to train in the underground bomb shelters with the volunteer aid workers because they're getting blown up. They're targeting the aid centers, the hospitals and the schools, just like we saw in the Syrian crisis. So we just started training in the bomb shelters, and then they started training the trainer, and it went from there. And then we were invited to the Coast Guard and the military, and then we got the official word that they wanted us to start training all the soldiers. So it kind of merged into, we look for the gaps, and when there's a gap, we jump in.
Now,
so we kept finding gaps.
The pronoun I'm hearing is we, but we is a more specific meaning. It's the third wave volunteers. And it's a real organization, correct?
Yes, Third Wave Volunteers nonprofit from Florida. I started as a first responder in September 11th, New York, 2001. Rollerbladed down there. I rollerblades 8 miles and ended up being under the North Tower and helping and washing out firemen's eyes. And then FEMA kept trying to shut us down, but I was with some other nurses. And then they kept coming around, oh, it's time for the professionals to take over. And then they go, yeah, and they go off, and then we keep washing out firemen's eyes and collecting like body parts on the pile. And then the last day they came through, and then they looked around, they covered their badge and said, please stay, that everyone's needed. And that's how we got our motto, because it's not just medical people. You need someone to carry the water, someone to hug people, someone to peel the carrots for the food. And there's just a job for everyone. So that's our motto, is everyone's needed. And it's strange that it came out of a FEMA situation. So that's how it all started. And we've been in every major natural disaster since, usually when there's 300,000 dead, the big disasters. But then we started working, as we started in a terrorist situation, with the Syrian crisis, the Venezuela crisis, and now in Ukraine.
Now, most of these crises are, well, I mean, there's the terrorist attack, but, you have these natural disasters, the tsunami and hurricanes and earthquakes in Haiti, for example, all these places you've been to. But this is kind of unique for you, the Ukraine, because it's really a war, and you're really on one side of this battlefield as opposed to a natural disaster, which is indiscriminate. How has that affected your mindset?
It hasn't affected me in a way that it was still helping humans. There's still starving people. There's still so many people that need help medically. There's so there's all those elements in play, but you have rockets going over your head and you could die at any time. When I went down to the World Trade Center, I said a prayer and I said, look, I've had an amazing life traveling the world. If it's my time, I'm ready. And because I prayed that, it got, the fear left, and it was filled with love. And I still pray that whenever I go out on a mission. And we've been lucky so far, but I'm not stupid too. I'm sort of use a more intelligent approach of where I go and everything, but you never know what can happen. But it's still helping people. I still call it a disaster. It's just a bit more dangerous over your head, and you're not sure where they're going to land.
And what areas of Ukraine? It sounds like you were all over, from Lviv to the east
Yeah,
to the
all over
south.
in the early days. Not Lviv, but more just on the east. We're just on the east. I have an apartment in Odessa, and then we push out to the front lines wherever it is. But now we're focusing on the southeast, where there's a great battle of Kherson. Now, a lot of the battle has been up in the Donbas high region where they took a lot of land, but now half the Russians are all heading down to Kherson for this great battle, which will happen in the next between now and the next 3 weeks. And they've really bombing heavily down there. But a lot of them are trapped in an area. The Russians are trapped in an area, and they're surrounded in some certain areas. So we're pushing through, and I feel like we're going to win in the south. And if we take back Kherson, we're going to push through to Crimea. So I know that there's no winning in wars, but all I can do is love in action and just trying to help good people, because it's a genocide. And just seeing the atrocious things that are going on, and working with the raped women, the raped babies, the raped little boys, and what they've gone through, that has to stop. Like, I know no one wins in war, but that has to stop, and at least that will stop. But I don't know how long for. They invaded in 2014, and now, so they'll probably just regroup and do it again. But it's against the rules of the world, that big bully coming next door like that. It's shocking.
So that was one of the questions I've asked a number of people. Is this war an expression of Russian will, or are they at the mercy of one
Yes.
psychopath?
They're at the mercy of a psychopath. I have so many Russian friends, and everyone in Ukraine has their parents living in Russia and everything. But there's so much misinformation when they call the parents don't believe there's a war. Like, they denial because of the disinformation. It's really Putin at the top, because I know way up at the top, when that Russian diplomat resigned, he said it's all about Putin and his palaces and getting richer and richer and grabbing more land. And it's all about that elite rich at the top, because even up near the top with his cabinet, he's put a lot of them in jail, and a lot of them are against it. Like in the early days, we saw hundreds of thousands that they arrested, which were against it. So it's really this madman at the top, and he's equivalent to a Hitler, and he must be stopped at all costs.
I've often wondered, how he's been able to maintain his chain of command all the way down to the young private sitting there in a foxhole in Ukraine, waiting to die. Like, why isn't there just a massive rebellion against him, or a coup against him? That's a mystery to me.
It's a mystery, and it is due to the misinformation. They are telling people that there are all Nazis in Ukraine, and that it's against US part of it, and the whole West, and that we're doing chemical weapons on the Russians that are in Ukraine, and we're killing anyone that speaks Russian, and it just all the ridiculous stories. But the younger generation know, because they have been protesting, but it's really mainly the older ones. But the chain of command is really terrible on the front line, on Ukraine's side and the war. There's no communications between them. Like in sophisticated wars, you have all this technology. So even the Ukrainians are shooting Ukrainians, and Russians are shooting Russians, because they don't know who's behind the tree. There's no intelligence that way when you ride up to the front. And even the US soldiers keep complaining about it. They're like, there's just no communication. I had to buy 10 little cell phones for them to go on a mission to try to communicate just with their unit, because they were trying to distract Russians. Ukrainians were trying to free a village. So they all went this way and were shooting at the Russians to distract them over here so they could get that village. But they don't know who they're shooting at, and because there's just communications is really bad. I'm not talking about Facebook and all that sort of stuff. But they don't have the walkie-talkies or whatever they use in there. So that's all mixed up. There's a lot of problems with this war. Even the soldiers, if I just know that when in Afghanistan and that the soldiers had like a mess hall and they had food and things, but these soldiers are just living in these pits for months, just like a hole in the ground, and they just lie there day after day with a can of baked beans or something. So that the support is hard that way. Yeah.
So you're in the combat zone. You're seeing the destruction and the missiles and the
Oh
bullets.
yeah. Yeah, even in Odessa, at the apartment, we have so many rockets that go over, and then they shoot it down, but it lands on people's apartments. Like Easter, we raced. We were on Easter. We were under bomb in Odessa, and we went down to the underground bomb shelters. But a lady had just had a baby, a month-old baby, and she was killed. The baby was killed, and the grandma and 9 others just sitting in their apartment because they had to shoot down the missile. So the missiles just land wherever. Talking about that day, there's always important a sense of humor in disasters. And so we're rushing down underground, and there was a nightclub that was turned into an aid center, and we're racing down. It's dark, and we get downstairs, and one of the volunteers says, "Have you looked where we are?" And then I go, "Oh, it was one of those sex dungeons, and there were whips and dildos.
I
And
saw that.
and bars, and there was a little kid sitting on the seat where the legs are apart playing a video game, and it was so surreal, but we just start laughing and laughing, and it took the tension away from what happened above. So the sense of humor is one of the most important things out of the field.
Another thing, I'm only guessing. I personally, I feel fortunate that I have never been in a war. I've not been scarred by that kind of conflict, but it seems like the sense of camaraderie and the connections and the companions and friendships that you make must rise to a different level of intensity than they do here in civilian life.
Absolutely. The camaraderie and just the trust between us all. And I feel it in all the cities and the towns and the country. Like everybody's just focused on the war. I'm going to make vests, flak jacket vests, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And volunteers driving people around, and you just feel it. And we feel so close to everyone. That's why it's hard when we're training the troops and we only get them for 4 or 5 days, and they're on the front lines. And then we hear a week or two later that they were all blown up by mortars or mines. It's crushing because I remember their faces so clearly in my head and my heart, and we had little moments together, that they're so thankful that they keep giving us presents. So they'll give us a patch or they give us a present, and we don't want presents. We're just there to help. And they give us a drawing an artist did of our team or something, So I have all these little things, and a lot of those people aren't alive anymore. That's a real tragic part because they have wives and kids and everything. And just knowing them so closely, even for that short a time, it's tragic.
So, when I read like yahoo.com or just trying to collect the news, I hear about the Russian fatalities, but honestly, the news that comes back about what the Ukraine people are suffering is unclear. It's almost, I don't really get the sense of the price they're paying in blood, for their country right now.
When a disaster happens, you always think they say it's 500 dead or 1,000, but then it ends up being sometimes 300,000, And there's so many graves everywhere because the Russians move into a town, they strip everyone down, and then they kill anyone with a tattoo. Because in the old days, if you had a tattoo, that means you were military. Way back in the day. So they'll kill that, and then they may kill in a village, as in they did in Bucha and stuff, everyone that's under the age of 50. They do certain things like that. So I forgot the line of thought. My line of thought.
Well, I had mentioned just how it feels like I'm not really hearing about the price Ukraine.
Oh, yeah. So there are so many more dying. So they're not giving the accurate numbers because they just don't know. And then they're just coming off to town after town of recaptured villages that they find graves of hundreds and hundreds of people. So they didn't know that, when they ask how many people are dying, it's not just the civilian soldiers on the front lines. It's villages full. Like one man had to bury his whole apartment building because they killed everybody. And they gave him 20 minutes to do it. And I've dug graves before with the Syrian crisis. It takes a whole half a day to dig a grave with a whole bunch of people. You had to do it in 20 minutes. So the war crimes are just very brutal and violent. It's
the thing about this is, those Russian first of all, Russia has made incredible gifts to our world culture, whether it's Tchaikovsky or Chekhov or
Pavlova.
Yeah, exactly. And their leaders wear suits and ties. But the nature of this war is genocidal. It feels like it's an assault on the culture of people as well as borders. It's trying to depopulate sections of the nation so that
burning the wheat fields,
burning, food, assault on it seems like
a
Genghis
maniac.
Khan, medieval, just a genocidal, just insane. Of course, there's a history between Russia and Ukraine. Holodomor, it's not the first genocide perpetrated by the Russian Muscovites against the Ukrainian people, but it's just hard almost to imagine in this day and age.
Yeah, it's a maniac that if like that's not very well, and if he doesn't have too long, he wants to take not only Ukraine but many other countries or with him. You know what I mean? I don't doubt for a second he would start using the chemical warfare or even further with nuclear, whatever, because he was going to die. I think he wants to take a lot of people with him. It's brutal, and it's a war of oil because Ukraine has amazing resources and oil, and they could provide oil to all of Europe and the world, and Russia would be obsolete, and they know that. But they're joining with Iran. They've been meeting with Iran to get weapons, and then China are on their side. So they're forming this superpower of China, Iran, and Russia together against US and other areas. So that's the scary part.
Yeah, well, we're in this what the 19th century people called the Great Game of these huge chess pieces, and even today, Nancy Pelosi arrived in Taiwan as a kind of warning to the Chinese, don't come over here. It's all part of this greater geopolitical game. My feeling is Russia. I mean, China needs. They're a big exporter they're part of the big capitalist supply chain. Their economy hangs on American consumption. I just don't know if they're willing to to sacrifice that
I
for.
think they've been emboldened by this war. I think they're going to move on Taiwan.
I hope not. Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
So your life, Alison, is a triumph of reinvention, from what I can gather. You were raised in Australia. Was it Sydney?
Sydney in the Australian bush, really, on the bush.
And you're a surfer girl and adventurous.
Girl, then a nurse, then a math teacher, then a very bad accident. I was crippled in a car accident in a wheelchair. Had to learn to walk again 14 months later or whatever. Then just started a new life in America. And I had the most amazing experience since. Worked on Wall Street, done lots of different things. I don't have OCD or whatever it's called, but I just follow the road less traveled, and new roads open up, and I just follow that road. And the humanitarian has been the most rewarding in the sense of all the skills you've done your whole life lead up to that. So you can do a little bit of filmmaking there and send it back to raise some money. You can teach the kids, they can nurse, and they can help run the hospital, use my skills on Wall Street to raise some money to pay for the new school. So it's a combination of everything really that you've done your whole life. And I found that teachers and mums are really good at running the camps, running refugee camps and disasters, because they're just like, you can't think too far ahead in the intelligence of how am I going to rebuild this village. It's like, okay, what do we need? Food and shelter and medicine. And so, I remember 2 hours back that way, they can go and get some sacks of rice and get this. And you just start to plan and build upon it. And it works. And it works when the grassroots up. The problem with all the disaster aid that goes on from the top down, from FEMA and the governments down, that doesn't work. You land in, say, Puerto Rico, they have Rotary, Lions Club, everything's in place, so we tapped into them because they know their land, and we give them strength and aid and 100 containers. And then we got 7,000 volunteers from all the universities. So people are ready in disasters. They just may have lost all their homes and that. So it's really grassroots up of how it works, and everyone has to step up. These disasters used to be one big one a year. Now it's back to back to back that we didn't do the whole world. We don't do the whole world anymore. We do US, Caribbean, Central South America, because it's just constant. So everyday citizens have to step up. And now we're doing a lot more work all over America because we're in a mess. There's Louisiana gets wiped out every year. Texas, Alabama, Florida, all these areas where the hurricanes and the fires in California, we're in a lot of trouble here. So we're doing a lot more work here as well, trying to balance it all. And yeah, so every citizen needs to step up, and there is a place for everyone, and that's where what we allow in our organization. People come on trips and they're like, I have no skills, and then you see them out there playing, doing artwork with kids or running around. And I found that all the different skills that journalists are very important. That's why we go. That's why I went to the 2004 tsunami, because you saw the bodies for the first time. They were showing on TV, thousands of bodies in the streets. So that front line is really key to get volunteers and people to go and help. If it's not on the news, we don't know it's there and we don't go. The sad thing is there's so many disasters that it stays on that disaster for a few months, but then it goes to the next one. And there's still 10 years of rebuilding or work that is in the last disaster. So that's
prisoners of the news cycle. I will say that I did make $100 donation to the third wave today.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Thank you. Through the website?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I'll have a look tonight. Thank you very much. That will be going, that will be used for food for the front lines, because none of us have salaries or anything. And besides paying an accountant to do our taxes once a year, the money goes straight to the people. And so I'll give you a little call once I'm in the front lines, and we go to the supermarkets, which is big supermarkets still in areas that aren't being bombed. And in Odessa, we fill up the vans and we plan all the necessities. So they get food for a month, about 200 people at a time. In different villages up the front. So that's what we're focusing on now, is still doing the medic training, but mainly delivering food to the front lines. So your donation will be feeding somebody.
Well, good. And for other people that would like to do that, what would just be the website? I will put it on when I...
Yeah, just go to the website. It's thirdwavevolunteers.com. And you can sign up to volunteer there. And I'm the one that will be answering you.
Oh, okay.
To volunteer. Usually answer them straight away as they come in, but it's taking me a week or so because we're so busy right now. We've still got missions in Bahamas and Haiti and all over the place. So from disasters of...
Now, how many of these people of the third wave are in Ukraine right now?
Altogether, we have 30,000 volunteers, but obviously I can't take that many to Ukraine. So on the grounds of local workers, we have about 35 in place that do different missions for us. But we were taking in, our people. But soon we'll halt that, and it's hurricane season, so we need to focus. But we've got a really good, trustworthy system now. So I send it to the women that I trust over there. They go shopping. They show me the receipt. They show me the video and photos of the front line. And that's how it works, the accountability. They see where it all goes and they get a thank you. You send it off to a lot of the larger orgs, and they have to raise $100 million before they leave their front door. They have to pay for so much overhead and their first class tickets and the $1 million salaries and that. So I'm always a big fan of donate to smaller groups or church groups, or if you ever raise like big amount, not talking about the war, but say it's a disaster, Puerto Rico or somewhere here, get on a plane and go, and don't just send the money off. You can find an orphanage or somewhere that needs something bought, and then just do it yourself. It's deliver it yourself, and that's how it really works, and that's how the money's going to the right spot. But sending it off blind to these big organizations, I'm not a fan of, and I've seen the wastage. I could write 10 books about it. The $500 night hotels, et cetera, and the waste of money.
Well, one of the thoughts that I had if I were to go to Ukraine or one of these places personally is that, okay, I'm there. I'm another mouth to feed. I'm another bed that has to sleep. I mean, I am making a demand just to survive on that place. So where's the difference between you're really helping or you're just like...
No, it really helps because you're feeding the economy. That's why when I buy $2,000 worth of food at a time, that's going to the economy. I don't need to bring it in aid containers and all that sort of stuff. You're feeding the economy. But my decision to go this trip alone is because, the money from the other people, like if I'm paying for some other volunteers for their plane ticket or whatever, I want to use that money for food. And that's why we're not going to continue to keep going, because I have a great team on the ground who live there and local, so we can send that money, because I don't want to waste that. It's like I was always a big, in Haiti, you'd see these groups come from Michigan and there'd be 30 of them, and it's a $2,500 ticket, and you times that by 30 and all the stuff, and they arrive and they're building a church or a school or something. But I really don't like that. I was all about send two people, builders, and teach the locals, and all that money could be used on the ground for materials and things like that. So it's a balance, and it depends which. But I really needed to take those 20 doctors and nurses the very first trip, because we were told we were getting those 24 special needs, and each one had a broken femur, or they needed very heavy meds every 2 hours, or feeding tubes. So I needed really experienced people on that trip. But then I found out, I'm not found out, but through experience of taking women. We really enjoyed taking women on this trip, because we got into a lot of secret places and people trusted us all over. And whenever we had guys with us, they were, against the wall with a gun to their head. Are you a spy? They were always suspicious of the men, but not the women for some reason. So in the end, I ended up only taking women and nurses and doctors and medics who were women, but also because we're working with the rape victims, and we can't bring any men around the rape victims because they're so traumatized.
And yet, in spite of this, I'm sure you've been asked this so much, because, you hear about it with soldiers and post-traumatic, and, you're confronted with so much destruction, and now you're in this pristine environment in Miami, and is it all about compartmentalization? How do you process it?
It took me a long time to sort of get to this point after September 11th. Being present, just being present. I'm working with a rape victim right now, and it's quite tragic. And then in the afternoon, I'm maybe picking up some bodies. And then the next day, I'm having lunch with my girlfriend. So just being really present in that moment. But another thing that really helps me is watching America's Got Talent and The Voice and all that. Just the beautiful singing and the golden buzzer moments. I don't know, it really heals me. And just listening to amazing music, it's very healing. So that's another kind of, not trick I use, but I have to stay present, because I can't be dwelling on all the things I saw in the past and too far in the future. I have to be present right now, like we're having a nice time here. And that's what works. It really does. And I think just it spills over into relationships and all sorts of other things as well. And it really, really lifts up your life in such a good way. So I know it's hard to do, but as you practice and you get better and better at it, and it works.
Now, sometimes, I've read about this with journalists that cover wars, and maybe even some soldiers, that they get sort of addicted to the adrenaline, and their life just feels has so much more meaning in these pressurized life or death situations, war, tragedy, disasters, and the domestic quiet part of their existence very often feels empty and meaningless. Is that something that you've had to deal with?
No, actually. It's not adrenaline for me. I just know that I have skills, some skills that a lot of people have, not anything amazing or anything. I just have these skills, and I really know that I can use them, and I can really help people. And then it goes back to that love and love in action. So I'm not addicted to the adrenaline or anything like that. I just know I can use these skills rather than just sitting around at home, going shopping or doing something else. So I value my time that I'm doing this, but I also value being back home with my husband and my dog. There's a balance. There's a balance in life. But no, I understand what you're saying, and I understand more being in this war, what the soldiers go through, because the sirens are going off every 5 minutes, and then the rockets and all that sort of stuff. And when you get it's so intense in the field, and they get home, and it's like there's the mall, and what do you do, and what do? They just don't fit back in, and I kind of understanding that more being in this war. But for myself, I just know I can help. And even if it just means giving people a hug, because sometimes we just don't have anything else but a hug. And then they just cry in our arms. And what I do is I hug people. That's our main thing. It was hard during COVID because our main thing is hugging. So I couldn't hug. But when I hug people, there's a general hug you give, and then people go to release, but I don't let them release. I hold them even tighter. And you wait for that, sometimes a few seconds or a few minutes, and then they collapse just into your arms, and then they let go and they just cry. And the serotonin is good for them, but they just finally let go after months and months and months of stress, trying to work out their home's gone, or what they're going to do with their kids, or how they're going to eat. So that those type of things are skills that aren't set down in the disaster aid manuals. but they're things that really work and they really heal people. So I concentrate on the love and the healing, and I get excited to do it. When I'm in a zone where there's hundreds of, like, thousands of dead bodies and everything's gone, I just feel at home, and I just feel like, okay, let's start here. Let's start hugging people. And it really does. It really,
I'm getting excited right now about the possibility of an extended hug from,
yeah, here we go.
a third wave volunteer. I'm digging it. I'm all over it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
via Zoom. Now, you mentioned two other important characters in your life: your dog and your husband. I don't know in which order, but how do they deal with this? Well, just the
He just
nervousness
walked
of
in the
being
door.
in a war zone and your absence. So how is that working for you?
Um, I used to go off and go to a disaster and I come back 4 or 5 years later. So I've had to learn to balance life and go off for like a couple of weeks and come back for a week, and balance. And he's been very understanding and amazing about it. And yeah, it's hard to explain, but there's a balance. I get out in the field, all my love is taken. I get so squeezed out like a toothbrush, or what is it called, the toothpaste, squeezed out. I have nothing left to give. And sometimes I get home and my friends call me, oh, I got this problem, I got the problem. I'm all squeezed out, I got nothing left. But then I get filled up by them. They fill me up with unconditional love, and then I'm like ready to give love to other people.
Well, I hope your tank is getting refilled while you're here.
I'm filled. Yeah. Yeah, it's
You're
so
not
good.
spilling over yet. I think there's more if you've just been here a few days. You've probably got a bigger tank. Need
No,
more.
I mean, I'm all ready. I'm all
You ready
ready.
to go back?
Give some love. Yeah.
So when you go back, I mean, the character of the war is changing. I mean,
Yeah.
you mentioned you were optimistic about the outcome.
Yeah.
Why?
It's a feeling you're there with the spirit of the people and all of it, and you feel the world behind us, because I'm
Hmm.
part of it. You feel the world's love, and I always say that we're loving Putin to death. And people online go, "What are you talking about? We got to kill him with a gun, and that love's not going to work." And I'm like, "You don't understand. It's like because the world is loving and getting behind Ukraine, it's supporting with weapons and food and all sorts of things, and taking in refugees to care for them, and that." So that is why I believe they will win. It's that you killing Putin with love and pushing in from the love from the world.
Well, of course, that idea is an idea that was expressed by Gandhi, first in South Africa and later in India. And as I mentioned earlier, he was an ambulance driver,
I love that
offered
fact.
aid in the Boer War and also in World War One.
Yeah.
So there is a nonviolent example. I've often thought, what is the nonviolent alternative to the remedy for this conflict? Normally, I've studied Gandhi. The idea was we use a nonviolent discipline to confront segregation or some other tyranny or injustice. But when you're confronted with a genocidal,
Suicidal
all
maniac.
out assault, the nonviolent response comes up short for me. And that's part of the struggle I've had just with this whole thing.
Yeah, and I guess I think about Putin. He wasn't really loved when he was younger. Something went wrong. Something major went wrong.
Yeah.
It's hard to talk about, but I just know I have to focus on what I can do and love. And I know love wins in the end because I've experienced it in village after village, all over the world, and it does win in the end. So I don't know. That's all I have to say about it. I can't, you know, predict the future, but there's a lot of love right now in Ukraine, and I feel it, and I feel the spirit of the world pushing hard. So
And I feel it across our little digital divide coming from the newest friend I have on earth.
let's stay in touch because I can give you a little call from when I get
We
back.
can make this a series. I often think, what can I do? And
Keep the story alive.
yeah, like we're dealing with short attention spans in the media, in
Yeah.
our own lives. And I feel like this is not a 2-week story. It's not a 6-month story. I'm not sure how long it's going to be, but it needs our attention, because this is the front for freedom and, territorial integrity and rule of law. And also, we're dealing with some of these issues, obviously, within our own borders in America. I don't need to expand on that. They're self-evident, but still, it's manifest right on those wheat fields of eastern Ukraine, this struggle. And like your video and photographs said, it's doctors and PhD students and fishermen and farmers that are, called to action in ways that I've never witnessed or experienced within my own lifetime, certainly within my own country, so.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine the Canadians invading us, and then people at the front is maybe New York. And it's just, when I tell people about it, I try to use that example, because Ukraine is beautiful, and the resources and the land and sunflowers going for like 20 miles. And it's just gorgeous place. And then just bomb, and the most beautiful Byzantine churches, like with Michelangelo type drawings, and they're just being destroyed and buried. It's just bizarre.
So not only is there a people under assault, a nation's political and geographical boundaries under assault, but something more delicate and beautiful that I've seen in the course of my Ukraine Voices show, a culture.
Culture.
Yeah. That's has the winds of time have blown across it, from Western Europe, from Russia, from the South, from Byzantium, from the Tartars, from the Mongols. There's this culture there that's also at risk, and I just trying to champion it in the small way that I can through this podcast.
No, it's amazing. You got to keep the story alive. And just on that culture thing, the most beautiful opera house in Europe is in Odessa. And it's gorgeous, and it's barricaded, and there's mines all around, because they're really trying to protect that. But if a missile hits, they can't protect from that way. Well, they can hit it down. But even when you go down to the beaches are all mined. Mm-hmm. It's just bizarre. But then people are going about their business everywhere, even in like the front area villages. Like I get back from a training, and I'm driving through this little village, maybe 4 houses, and there's a lady trying to teach her 3 or 4-year-old on one of those bicycles how to ride in a little red jacket. And I'm like, there's bombs down there, but she's trying to teach her daughter how to ride a bike. It's bizarre. And then in other areas, there's restaurants open, and people are going about their business, and it's just bizarre.
Well, life, like the mighty river Volga, and what's the big river, Dnipro? How do you say the big river? The Dnipro keeps flowing in spite of everything. So that's, I guess, part of the story. It's behind one village is this tragedy, and then somewhere else somebody's learning how to ride a bike and play an instrument or whatever. Seems like that's the canvas that you've observed.
Yeah.
Wow. Alison, I want to first give you a last opportunity before we say goodbye to share with people how they can be volunteer, be helpful, make a donation, because essentially what I saw your TED Talk and the websites and the interviews and this, is that what you're saying is there's an open invitation and there's a place for everybody to make a difference in this calamity and others.
It's really true. You don't have to chant on the hill and shave your head, but there's room for everybody, and
I didn't shave it, but I did shave it.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't have to, but I did. Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's good. It's good. I have a hat like that too.
Okay.
Panama Cuban hat. Anyway, it's just we're all a village, and there's so much suffering in America as well. You just go down the street to the poorer areas or whatever you can do. It's just about getting out there and doing something, because there's just so much need out there, and it's just waiting for everybody to do something. That's all I say, just do something. We can't take everybody to Ukraine, but as soon as you hear a disaster or something's going on near your town, just step up, go over to the main church, and then start just helping some way. You might be cooking, you might be organizing aid, but they really need you, and everyone is needed. Doesn't matter if you don't have any skills.
Well, one of the things that I got as sort of my final thought as you described your experience when the two planes hit the World Trade Center, and
Yeah.
at that, when your rollerblades were hidden, and you were at that moment, you found a meaning in your life that had sort of
Mm.
escaped you, that has informed every second till this moment. It seems to me.
Yeah. It's just that there's a bigger story out there. You know, we're only here for 80 years, if that. And you can just be continuing suffering and all the bad stuff that happened to you, but just let it go. You know, there's just so much more important stuff. It's family and friends in the end. It's not all the stuff you want to take with you. I just see people losing stuff in disasters, and it's just stuff. So it's just about loving, you know, on the shores of Lesbos. You know, you have a refugee and a volunteer, and they embrace, and there's no walls or discrimination. And sometimes they hug for a few minutes, or sometimes even longer. But it's just that beautiful moment of unconditional love, and for two human beings to come together. So everybody can have that feeling, and it's so healing, and it's so uplifting, and it spreads into all your relationships as well. And that's the happiness. That's the secret of happiness. I really feel like I've found it.
Well, I got to get one of those third wave hugs, those extended third wave hugs. I'm waiting. Well, I want to thank you for your time. Hang on. I'm going to end the recording, but we can just kind of continue ourselves. Folks, pitch in, chip in. There's a place for you, thirdwave.org, or is that what it is?
Thirdwavevolunteers.com.
Okay,
we are an org, but we do .com.
Okay, so. thirdwavesvolunteers.com. It's a couple clicks away. You can make a difference there. And
sign up to volunteer, not for Ukraine, but it's hurricane season. And
hurricanes, I can guarantee some bad stuff is going to be happening. They'll need your help.
Let's have fun. We play guitars around the fire at night. And
bring my clarinet, baby. I've got the jazz going. That's my thing. So till next time, everybody, namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that, I mean namashaloha. See ya.